Hey, good evening, everybody. So glad y'all could join us this evening. We certainly look forward to spending this time with you guys and hope y'all are blessed and edified by what Sonora and I do each time we get to meet like this. So thank y'all for your prayers, your love, your support, your attendance. And boy, we're so glad to see y'all. Uh, Sonora, come on in. Let's wish everybody a happy Father's Day. Hope everybody had a good celebration today.
I hope so. I hope they did. Did you?
I did. I tell you, it was great. It was
Good.
great.
Good.
Uh, you noticed I changed shirts. I didn't keep my.
You did. We won't talk about that.
Okay.
We won't talk about that right now.
Uh,
I think we've got a good podcast. I think may have tried to cram too much in here, but we'll get to what we can get to, and we'll stop when we need to. So,
okay.
what do you think?
Well, you and I have talked about so many things. The last 4 weeks, you and I have just been discussing things that are pertinent to the podcast, things that are pertinent to what we believe is the condition of the church in 2026, June 21st, 2026, to be specific. And, part of what we try to teach, what we try to share out of the scripture, and then, some of our viewers and listeners know that I actually teach a Bible study on Wednesdays at noon in the lunch hour on Wednesdays. And you and I have just talked so much about where we are, what we're trying to accomplish. We put a label on it called kingdom building, and we don't know if we're doing a good job, bad job, average job, no job at all. And then we talk about subject matters, and some of what we're going to show tonight is great. And then what we'll do if we have time to finish up, we're going to share some of our thoughts and concerns, stuff that you and I
Well,
talked about earlier
just
this
up
morning.
front, I want to say that a whole lot of what we've talked about just recently has got to be the distractions that are keeping us from kingdom work.
Yes,
There's so much misinformation. What we're trying to do on this podcast is give Bible facts, get you from the Word, so that you have an arsenal in your back pocket.
yes,
So that you can say, "Wait a minute, I know what the Bible says." And that's not what it says, or yes, in agreement, because it only takes 5 seconds of being on the internet, and that people don't know what they're talking about. They don't have a
yes,
clue. They
yes.
don't have a clue. And so we're trying to give you a clue, right, Keith?
That's right. That's
We're
right.
trying to give a clue.
As much
We
as the
are
Lord leads us to.
we're
So
getting to some important stuff here. Not that it's not all important, but we are Via Dolorosa. We're on the road. Christ is, we're here. The time has come. The
we're
the
at the lick.
jumping off spot. Yep.
Yes, we're at the
Gonna
lick.
get right. We are at combining for this particular study the Gospels, all of them of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so that we will have a harmonized summary telling the stories that happened, because each one brings their own specific details for us to look at to put together the entire picture. Not that you can't read any one of the Gospels and get this story. You can. You absolutely can, and it's powerful. So we're not saying that any one is better than the other. We're saying all four combined are the best in our opinion. And so, we're at the point now where Jesus has already been questioned by Annas, Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate, Herod, and then he's been returned back to Pontius Pilate for sentencing. And Pilate tells the crowd, "I have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod." In a somewhat debated order, depending on how you read this or how you interpret this, but Pilate orders Jesus scourged, which means just severely, severely beaten, the most severe lashing that a person under the law that they think a man could survive. This is that type of beating. And many people didn't even make it past a scourging like this. They died. Blood loss would be unbelievable. And not to, I don't want to sugarcoat this. I really don't. When I was, preparing a lot of this, I try to have visuals and things like that. I'm not trying to be sensational or anything like that. But at the same time, it almost seems wrong to put up some of the paintings and pictures and things that I would have way earlier thought were appropriate of Jesus being crucified. And it's not the real picture. Jesus having 4 stripes across his back is not the picture.
No,
not a mark on him and just something in his side. That's not getting the real picture of this. And I know I can't really give you a picture, but just understand that this is a horrible, horrible beating.
Last week you and I suggested everybody if you've never seen it, you need to see it, and if you have seen it but it's been a long time, you probably need to go back and watch Mel Gibson's The Passion of Christ again, because it's pretty doggone realistic. Go ahead.
But the fact that Pilate has him scourged to this extent, and we don't have any way of really knowing the mind of Pilate, but it kind of seems like maybe he thought that the crowd would be satisfied with that. They wanted him. They were crying. There was like a bloodlust going on. Maybe that would satisfy the crowd. And he offers this traditional Passover release where he gives a choice between Jesus and Barabbas, who is a pretty bad dude. He's not just a thief; he's an insurrectionist. He's murdered people in that in his quest, for insurrection. So he is a person who deserves a crucifixion. That would be what the Romans would have crucified somebody for. Yes. He is a person that would have deserved that. And the crowd chooses Barabbas because the chief priests pretty much stir up the crowd. And then the people, the mob mentality, give us Barabbas. And Pilate even asks them, what am I supposed to do with Jesus, the one's called the Christ? And they yell out, crucify him. And the guilty man goes free while the innocent man is condemned. So he even says, behold the man. He presents the battered Jesus. Many people, think that this is like his humanity there standing before judgment. Pilate seems to hope the crowd is going to be satisfied with that, but they've just become more determined. So he finally yields. Matthew records him washing his hands. And we talked about that, last week, that Pilate may be, borrowing from imagery from the Jewish leaders, in Deuteronomy 21, it's when a murdered person was found and the killer was unknown, the elders of the nearest town were instructed to wash their hands over a sacrificed heifer and declare, our hands did not shed this blood. That's kind of what it looks like. He's using their own, traditions and things to symbolize, y'all are doing this and not me. But the king is rejected by his own people, handed over basically to the Gentiles, because the Romans are the Gentiles. The soldiers mock the king. They place the scarlet robe on Jesus. They weave a crown of thorns. We covered all this in detail last week. Mock scepter, kneel before him in ridicule. Hail, King of the Jews. All this is going on. The irony is just profound. They intend mockery. They unknowingly proclaim the truth, the actual truth. He is the King of the Jews. But in John 19, it's 16 through 17. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. And we want to kind of unpack some of this. The Via Dolorosa is, let's see, I think I have it on the next slide. It's called the Way of Sorrows. And there are various routes here that people say, this is the way he walked. This is the way he walked. You know, there's a traditional way, and then there's some new ways that are increasingly supported by archaeological evidence. We're not going to get into all that today, but they have different starting points. But the thing to remember here is that Jesus is severely weakened. I mean, he survived a beating that killed a lot of other people. Not only that, he's been up all night. I mean, the whole weight of this whole thing is on him. He's led away, bearing his cross. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but most likely a cross beam. And today, the path that Jesus took is known as the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. Cross beam, Keith, most people believe that it is common misconception that Jesus carried the entire cross. Most historians believe that condemned prisoners just carried the cross beam, that the actual pole was already in the ground or already at the site, that they just left it there for the next person or whatever, and that they carried their own cross beam. But that cross beam alone would have weighed anywhere between 75 and 125 pounds. So even carrying the cross beam, you know, after that type of scourging would have been unbelievable. You know, you think about 75 pounds. If anybody has ever picked up an 80-pound bag of concrete, you can imagine what that would be like. And not only that, it would be super awkward, you know, to carry through a crowd of people that are pushing in on all sides. So he takes it to the place of the skull. And the scriptures tell us that he was crucified at Golgotha. So we know that, whatever Golgotha. But the path would have been excruciating from any starting point. This site's also greatly debated. I put a photo here of an actual site that they believe is on the side of the hill Golgotha, because it's called, you know, the place of the skull. Well, you can see in that photograph that the eye sockets in the skull, especially if you back off from it the greater distance, it really looks like that. You know, Jesus would have walked up to half a mile with that 75 to 100 pound, 125 pound beam in his condition. You know, it's just Simon of Cyrene, I want to talk about. John 19:17 says that he starts out, for sure, carrying his own cross. He went to the place of the skull, Golgotha. This emphasizes that Jesus did begin the journey with the crossbeam himself. Matthew, Mark, and Luke record that Simon of Cyrene was compelled to carry the crossbeam for Jesus later in the procession. Now, I want to read a few of these, and there's some points I think to be made here and some insight into what's going on. Matthew 27:32, as they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon. They forced him to carry the cross of Jesus. Mark 15:21 adds that Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus, suggesting, wouldn't you say, Keith, there that they're suggesting that his family was known to the early Christian community? You know, they know who he is, they know the sons. And Luke states that Simon was coming in from the country and was made to carry the cross behind Jesus. So let's look at Cyrene for just a second. Are you proud of me? I got a map on here.
Well, I can name a few of our followers that are maybe they'll show up in the comments. They're going to be so.
I don't know. I don't think anybody's told us where they're watching from.
With the map.
Yeah. Now, Cyrene was a prosperous Greek-speaking city in what is now Libya or in North Africa. It's about 800 miles west of Jerusalem, and it's home to a large Jewish population. And I think you know why, Keith. an important center of trade and learning, because this area is part of the Jewish diaspora we've talked about so many times.
Then it's
Jews,
called diaspora.
Diaspora, you're right. Jews living outside Israel. And Keith, think of the word dispersed, right? So why were they dispersed in the first place? We can all look back and remember our lessons about Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
Tower of Babel, when the languages were confused and people were dispersed out and God wasn't going to let them collect there anymore. And that's called, you may as well say, the dispersion of Jews into these areas. Now, I've got a smaller map here. Let me see if I have a couple of, here's a little bit better, I think.
Well,
that's kind of I thought I had a closer one. Let me go one more. Nope, I didn't. I took it out. Cyrene, the red arrow, and then you can see Jerusalem on the far right. Now think about this. That's, if you walked that's probably 800 miles or so, to Jerusalem. Most people that could afford to would probably have preferred to have sailed most of that. They would have traveled by foot to the shorelines, and then they would have sailed over to Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, I mean, it's going to take a while to do that. Now, we're looking at Jerusalem. You can see Cyrene here on the far left, Alexandria, then Cyrene. So this is a map showing that kind of the dispersion motions of the ways that these people would have. What am I trying to say? This sounds terrible.
Well, you got to remember the Tower of Babel was all of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
In Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9, it makes it clear that the nations, the table of nations that's found in chapter 10 of Genesis, names the city, the location of Cyrene.
Mm-hmm.
And then the diaspora, the dispersion of the Jews, occurred in the two conquerings of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom by foreign forces after the kingdom split after Solomon's death into the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, and they were defeated on two separate occasions. The northern kingdom fell about 120 something years before the southern kingdom did, but the dispersion occurred when the two kingdoms were defeated and the people were carried away. The northern kingdom suffered the worst, simply because they were not kept in a central location like the southern kingdom was. The southern kingdom was taken to Persia. Well, at the time it was Babylonia, and they were able to keep their. And that's the story of Daniel and so on. They were able to keep their identity pretty much intact and that sort of thing. When the northern kingdom fell, they were scattered far and wide, sold as slaves, and so the Jewish identity. I mean, they really struggled to have any kind of Jewish identity at all. But that's how they got spread over what were already the nations of the earth, named in Genesis chapter 10.
Well, by this map is allegedly, and I don't have any way to actually confirm this other than somebody did this work, that this is the Jewish diaspora. Is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm.
First and second centuries AD.
This is after the temple fell in 70 AD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so this is at what the map, it shows the area. That's not in dispute. But what this is actually showing is the diaspora of Jews after Jesus had been here on earth and had died and buried and resurrected. Now, the reason it's important is because, and this is a good map, it's showing exactly what we're talking about, but this dispersion this is the second major dispersion of Jews that occurred.
Okay, and but what I want you to notice about that, I don't want to lesson on that. I mean, I want it, but not here. What I want you to get from this is you'll notice down in the little legend down here at the very bottom, it says that little blue dot means ancient synagogues. Look
There
at
you go.
Cyrene. There's one there. So this is a place that Jews were dispersed to at the time of Jesus's crucifixion. And guess what? Everybody is coming to town for what?
Passover.
They're coming for Passover. The town is overflowing. People can't all even stay in the town, and one of the things that we can know, Barbara is appreciating my mouth. One of the things that we can know, because the scripture tells us this, is a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. That's in Mark 15:21. Mark's readers would have immediately recognized that he was a part of the Jewish dispersion.
Mm-hmm.
See that? They
Yep.
because he's the father of two known men or boys. And I'm thinking perhaps they live locally in the rural countryside and the father's there for Passover visiting.
Yeah.
He's a Jew from North Africa living hundreds of miles from Jerusalem. He's part of a worldwide Jewish community scattered among the nations. Even at the time of Jesus's crucifixion, Keith, there were Jews living way, way, way far away.
Yeah, and if you remember, we actually had back when we were covering the kingdom of Saul, the monarchy, Saul, David, and Solomon. We showed and covered some of the archaeological evidence that Jewish military soldiers were trying to chase Philistines and other Canaanites who had taken ships from Canaan and were going west along the through the Mediterranean, and we covered that all the way back to King David time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Jewish presence in North Africa, so it's not surprising at all that there would be a synagogue in Cyrene,
an ancient synagogue. Yes. That was there. Coming from the country, I've probably already said this, but the Greek doesn't necessarily mean, that he was working on a farm that morning and he was coming in from the rural area outside of Jerusalem. He's most likely he's a Passover pilgrim, and he may have been lodging outside the crowded walls. I mean, but he's probably walking in to celebrate Passover.
Well,
and he unexpectedly encounters the one who would fulfill Passover forever.
Well,
and carries his cross.
You got to remember, this is one of the most important feast celebrations in the Jewish cultures, and that's Passover. So the city of Jerusalem proper could never have held all the pilgrims that came to Jerusalem at that time. They would set up temporary tents. They would sleep out in the open outside the walls of Jerusalem. So, there's no telling how far away somebody had to camp with that huge influx of people.
I looked a lot, and I didn't put it all in here, but I looked a lot at, how common it would have been for Jews to make a trip like that, because it took days and weeks. And if they walked or had tried to do this by land, you can imagine walking 800 miles. I mean, my goodness, but it was a requirement that men, a legal kind of requirement, that men of the households would attend Passover if at all possible. Yes. But it wasn't possible for so many people if they didn't have money. I mean, it might be a once in a lifetime thing. Wealthy people might be able to make that trip, but not not most people. And so it was not probably an everyday thing. It wasn't an everyday for somebody to come from that distance. And you could see how very far away other people were, even further. But these people are all flooding in, so There are lots of folks in town for Passover, but right place, right time. Simon was there. I want to connect some dots for just a second because, just this is an opportune time to do that. Looking forward, for a moment, to that day at Pentecost. We've talked about this and hinted on this before. Just want you to put this in the back of your mind so when we get there, because Jesus's followers were gathered in the upper room, and it says that a violent wind from heaven filled the room, and tongues of fire that separated came to rest on each one of them. They were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them. Now, I think it's important to see just how connected all this is. We tend to think of this as, a place far, far away. We don't know anybody from there. Well, guess what? We know Simon of Cyrene. He carried Jesus' cross, because Acts 2:15-12 says, now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. And when they heard this sound, the crowd came together in bewilderness, because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? And then how is it that each of us hears them in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia,
Cappadocia, Cappadocia,
Pontus and Asia,
Phrygia,
yep, and Mesopotamia, on and on and on. We get down and it says, and the parts of Libya near Cyrene. Where was Simon from? Cyrene. So all these visitors that are coming in, both Jews and converts to Judaism, I believe that Simon was a Jew, right? I mean, he could have been a convert, but something like that probably would have been mentioned if I don't know, maybe not. It is mentioned that they know him well enough to know his family or his sons, So I think maybe there's some local people
if
there.
He had been a total stranger and they named him by name and named his two sons, there would have been more description. So I think the assumption that he was Jewish and he was there for the holiday is perfectly a comfortable fit.
But we're looking forward, now that we're on those maps, now that we're looking at the dispersion, now that we're looking at all that, these people coming with the arrows going out, they're coming back into Jerusalem in Acts. And that's where we have Pentecost and the reclaiming of the nations. Just keep that in mind as we go forward. Pentecost 33, and the spreading of the good news. Well, guess what? They all come in, they all hear that. Look where they take it back to. This is Pentecost. This is where it is spread back to. These are the places that are kind of mentioned right here.
And something that a lot of people miss is the fact that there's a place or two where Paul talks about him going to a place that he'd never been before and finding that there were already believers there.
Yes.
And most people attribute it to the ones who were there on the day of Pentecost, who were so just blown away by the events of Pentecost and
heard the gospel in their own
Peter's
language
preaching,
from people that didn't speak their language, the supernatural.
Exactly. And so they went back to where they were from, and they actually laid a lot of groundwork for what Paul and Barnabas and Peter and James and the rest of them, Philip, came into. And
you can imagine, the letters of Paul are basically, first of all, churches he helped with, I think, but you can imagine that he's trying to get this thing going in the right direction. That's why he was having to write these letters, to the new Christians. Now, one of the things we get, Luke especially talks about, it's only appearing in Luke, but the women of Jerusalem weep. It says a crowd follows Jesus, the Via Dolorosa. Many women are mourning and lamenting, and Jesus turns and says, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children. And I think he's warning of the coming judgment that's going to come on Jerusalem. And many see this as pointing to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. When he says that, the crowds mock him. 3 groups of people basically are mentioned that mock him: the passersby, which, just the general population; religious leaders are in on the mocking. They're not standing back just letting the people do it. They're doing it too. One of the criminals, they challenge him, save yourself. I don't know if they were yelling save yourself because they wanted to see some spectacle and some miracle, or they were really mocking him because they didn't think he could save himself. But ironically, Keith, the very reason that he doesn't save himself is because he's saving you. He's saving me. He's saving other people. There's a kind of a distant view of that Golgotha that I was talking about. You can see a little better there. Place of the skull. And like I said, it kind of remains debated exactly where that is. I've watched a lot of archaeological things on that, and it's hard to really know which is exactly right. But I believe it was outside the city walls as required by Roman execution practices. That was a common thing. So there's a charge that is written above his head because Pilate orders an inscription carved, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And so everybody could read it, no matter who you were. It's written in Hebrew, it was written in Latin, it was written in Greek. And the religious leaders object. They don't want that. And Pilate responds and says, what I've written, I have written. He's not backing down.
He's not worried about what they're saying anymore. They've already put him in a bad predicament, and he don't like it. So he's not too concerned with what they're thinking right now.
Yeah, I think
the wheels have already been set in motion.
Right.
It's out of his hands now, and he's not looking forward to where they're going. And so he's about fed up with the religious leaders that got him into this predicament he didn't want to be in.
Yep. So even while Jesus is being crucified, he intercedes for the executioners. It says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, can you imagine people are nailing you to the cross? Jesus refuses the what I'm calling drugged wine, because he is offered wine mixed with, it's some people say gall, some people say myrrh. Sometimes gall is a word for bitter. And so myrrh is a bitter, but it was essentially an ancient painkiller. Kind of, a lot of scholars think it was a narcotic, that was used to lessen suffering. Romans were not that worried about necessarily just being totally sadistic. I mean, they wanted a prisoner that was easy to handle. They didn't want to be out there all night with it. They wanted this to be over with. I mean, it wasn't some people say it was an act of mercy. I'm not so sure it was an act of mercy as much as it was just easier for them if they drugged them. But remember Proverbs 31, it says, give strong drink to him that is ready to perish. I think that was a traditional thing that they would do anyway. The Talmud, which was written later, but is preserving earlier traditions. Just because it's written later does not mean it's not accurate. Mentions that compassionate women in Jerusalem provided drinks like this for the condemned. But Jesus refuses this. He refuses this drink. And possible reasons, I believe, why he refused it. I mean, I think he chose to bear the suffering fully. I think, the physical pain, the humiliation, the thirst, the agony, without dulling his senses. I mean, I think this is deliberate submission that he wants to. Remember, we talked in past podcasts about drinking from the cup that the Father gave him. He wants to fully drink from that cup. Before the nails even get driven in, he's offered a drink that could have dulled the pain, but he refused it. And the one who came to bear the sins of the world chose to face the cross fully conscious, fully aware, and fully committed to completing the work he'd come to do. He wasn't just enduring it, Keith. he was embracing it. He was embracing it. We do have to talk about crucifixion. I mean, it's not a comfortable thing to talk about, but like I said before, Romans are not really concerned with consistency. They would hang people on crosses all kinds of ways. They would vary how they nailed them to the cross. They would, sometimes it'd be this way, sometimes it'd be that, and feet on the side, feet crossed in the front. There was no way to do it other than just get them up there. But so much of being on the cross was not about blood loss and things like that. It was just the agony of breathing, because it's suffocation. They to be able to breathe, they would have to push up with their feet, which were nailed to the cross, take a breath, pull up with their arms, and then they'd collapse back down again. Every breath was horrific. That's why they went and broke their legs eventually, so that they could hasten.
Couldn't push up
this.
anymore.
They would basically just suffocate quickly. There's some pictures here that are interesting, and you may have even had some of these on before, but the one on the far left, this skeleton was found among dozens buried at the site of a former Roman era village, and it is a crucifixion nail through a heel bone.
Yeah, most artists have rendered it where the feet were crossed. I don't know if y'all can see this.
Yeah.
The feet were crossed and big spikes driven in through both feet into the wood. Well, that was possible, but there's no evidence that survived that. What has survived is the fact that the feet were actually put on each side of the post, and then nails driven from the outside of the heel through the heel bone into the wood on both sides. And that's a photograph of right there.
They did it different ways. I've done a lot of research. There are all kinds of ways they would put them up there.
Yeah.
There are even sometimes not nailing them.
They just tied them up there. Yeah.
Tied them, and it would take days and days and days for them to die.
Yeah. Some of the crosses have a little footrest. Instead of nailing them to that footrest, they would tie their feet so that they would have the footrest there. And again, it's a case of, they get tired, they get just exhausted, they can't push themselves up anymore.
It's excruciating to think about. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
It's not a contradiction. Yeah, it's not a contradiction at all that they say that he was nailed through his hands and his feet, because in the vocabulary, through the wrist, they did it through the two bones, that would be considered the hand as well in the language. So I just wanted to make those points. But Jesus is crucified. The nails are driven through his hands or wrists and feet, and the cross is raised. Two criminals are crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. That's what the scripture says. Remember Isaiah 53 that we've been talking so much about? He was numbered with the transgressors. He is crucified between two criminals. And let me say this, they didn't crucify people for just stealing a little something. No. It had to be pretty bad to get crucified. You had to be a hardened criminal. So they're hanging him up there between the two of them, almost in a mocking way, that he would be in the middle of all that. But at first, both men appear to join in mocking Jesus. You can find that in Matthew and Mark. However, as the hours pass, one of the criminals undergoes a dramatic change of heart. The unrepentant criminal says, he mocks Jesus and says, "Save yourself and us." He wanted rescue from his circumstances, but showed no repentance. And he died rejecting the one beside him. And then the repentant criminal acknowledged his own guilt. He said, "We are punished justly." In other words, we deserve this. but declared that Jesus is innocent. This man's done nothing wrong. And expressed faith in Jesus' coming kingdom and asked Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replied, truly, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise. I mean, I just can't tell you how thankful I am that those two criminals are in the gospel story, because, you know, it tells us a lot. For one thing, it tells us that one thief was, I believe that is so on purpose. You know, God is not, everything is so intentional in this. One thief was saved so that no sinner would despair. I mean, up until the last moment, right? But only one was saved so that no sinner would presume. I think that's important. You can't, it is an obvious picture here. The scene beautifully illustrates it. Salvation's not earned by a lifetime of good works. I mean, this guy is breathing his last, you know, but he received through faith in Christ salvation, even in his final moments. I mean, it's hard to twist the gospel story once you add the two thieves, isn't it?
No, there's so many things that's illustrated by this. Free will is one thing.
Yes, we've been talking about that a lot.
And for by grace are you saved through faith,
and not of works.
Not of works, lest any man should boast. God intentionally said, this is the only way to restore fellowship with me. It's your choice, but you have to believe that there's nothing you can do to earn your way back into my heaven.
Exactly. You got two sinners. You could call them criminals, whatever, but you got two sinners hanging there. They've done this. It implies they've done the same things. They have committed the same crimes. It kind of lists them as if they're, you know, a mirror of each other. It doesn't differentiate. One was a robber and one was a this or one was that. Thank you. Thank you that you didn't do that, because we all would have said you can go to heaven if you're a murderer, but you can't go if you're a robber. I mean, we would have messed it all up. We would have messed it up. Yeah. So they've got this. God did this so we would have this picture, this scene.
There's only one element that lays out the contrast, because everything else they're equal.
Yes, that's it. The soldiers divide his garments. This is so crazy to me. But evidently, and I think I have another slide on this, but they gamble for his clothing. John gives the fullest detail here. Outer garments are divided. The seamless tunic is left intact. Lots cast for ownership, but it does fulfill a prophecy. Let's go a little bit further on this. A typical Jewish man in the first century wore several garments. He had sandals. He had sometimes a shawl or a head covering, a belt or a sash, an outer cloak, and a tunic, the garment worn next to the body. So dividing the outer garments, I wanted to know what that was. So John tells us that after he was crucified, they took his clothes, they divided them into 4 shares, one for each of them. A Roman execution squad was most often 4 soldiers. So each soldier got a portion of Jesus's belongings. And this was a standard Roman practice. It's kind of like the spoils of war kind of thing. It's that's their payment for going through this and being on this detail. So the possessions of an executed criminal became the property of the execution detail. So the spoils from the execution, there you go. Why not divide the tunic? This garment was seamless, woven into one piece from top to bottom. A seamless tunic was evidently unusual. And if they cut it into 4 pieces, it would lose most of its value.
No longer be a tunic.
Yeah. So nobody would have a usable garment anyway. I mean, just to be big chunks of cloth. So instead they said, let's not tear it. Let's decide by lot who will get it. And essentially they gambled for it. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. I mean, I'm sure the soldiers thought they just thought that up right then, but this is fulfillment right here. Psalm 22:18, they divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. Keith, that was written 1,000 years before the crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 2-part prophecy: clothes divided, casting lots for the garment, right? I mean, that's very specific. And the soldiers unknowingly fulfilled both of those right there at the foot of the cross or wherever they did it. So, they thought they were settling ownership of a garment. And God's demonstrating here that every detail of the Messiah's suffering had been foretold, planned, and known. And it's just wild. More prophecy gets fulfilled. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came all over the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice. And you say this, Wells, you say it.
Eli, Eli, lima sabachthani.
Which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Matthew and Mark, you can find that in both places. Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? That's Psalm 22.
He wasn't crying out to God. He was trying to tell everybody within earshot, go back and read Psalm 22.
This is all planned. This is not the accomplishments of men. This is not a victory for the religious leaders. This has been what's the word? Foreordained. Ordained from so far back. So when he's near death, I do want to make this point that Jesus does accept a sour wine, which is vinegar wine, near the time of his death. It's a common soldier's drink. It's not the drugged wine that we were talking about before, because many scholars believe that he accepted this because it didn't function as an anesthetic or analgesic, and it helped him speak his final words. Because if you kind of read this, you can kind of get a picture. It has prophetic significance as well. And Matthew could have been drawing significance to Psalm 69:21, where it says, they put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst. And many Christians see the offering of the bitter drink as another fulfillment of the messianic prophecy. But don't forget Psalm 22:15. I looked this up myself, digging for this, because I knew this was in here. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Because I think he's trying to speak, because it says
he's so dehydrated. He's
right.
Lost so much blood. He's lost so much blood plasma, exhaustion, sweat. You remember he was so agonizing early that morning in the garden. He was says he sweated drops of blood. He was in such agony.
Oh yeah.
So he from then to where this picks up, he's done nothing but give off bodily fluids. So he is severely dehydrated, and that's that passage in Psalm 22.
Yes, and because this is what it says. It says, when some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge, and he filled it with wine vinegar and put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. I mean, I think that's why he took the drink, because and when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. It is finished. Say that one. Tetelestai.
Tetelestai.
Okay. Because see how when they gave him the drink, I think it helped him be able to speak. I think
Mhm.
he wanted to say that. What does that mean? This is so amazing. The verb comes from teleo, meaning to finish, to accomplish, to bring its intended goal, to fulfill, to pay in full. The form that Jesus uses indicates it has been finished and remains finished, like done. It's done. The debt of sin. In the ancient world, receipts and tax documents have been found with that word written across them, meaning, like we would stamp paid in full. Young people don't know about that, but they used to do that. They used to, you had your mortgage, your thing, and they would stamp paid in full and then mail you your deed back. You remember?
Mhm. Oh
Um,
yeah.
but it's paid in full. It's not a payment plan. It's not a partial payment, not balance due, paid in full. That's what that word means. And for 1,500 years, look at the sacrificial system there had been. Lambs had been sacrificed, bulls, blood been shed. Yet, Hebrew does say, Keith, it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Those sacrifices pointed forward. They're pointed forward to this moment. Jesus was the reality that they were pointing toward when he cried, "It is finished. It is paid in full." The need for future sacrifice was ended. The true Passover lamb had been offered. It was him.
Mhm. Well, so many people don't understand. It's the Bible, the Bible, the Bible, the Bible. That's all they hear. They think it's all one thing, and it's not. The Old Testament brings you to the New Testament. The Old Covenant converts into the New Covenant. The Old Testament prophesied about the New Covenant that was going to come with the birth of the Messiah and the sacrifice he was going to pay, before while he was alive here on this earth. And so it's a transitioning, and so many people who want to criticize the Bible have never read the Bible. They've never studied the Bible. They don't know that that's the transition where God was showing everybody, you're never going to be good enough to get into my heaven. You're never going to be good enough to earn your way into my presence. There's none righteous, no, not one. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God.
Hmm.
The Old Testament showed us we needed a Savior.
Yeah, because it's impossible, just like it said, for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. This was just
Right.
a covering for sin until this
God was
moment.
letting them play at it until it was time. And then it was time to bring the Messiah.
Because one of the things that the Bible tells us happened is the curtain of the temple, Keith. At that
Mm-hmm.
moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. This is a heavy piece of tapestry. This is not something that would easily tear. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. It says that the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life, and they came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many. But that temple that separated, what was the curtain? The curtain separated even the priests themselves from the Holy of Holies where God dwelt. And we've talked about this in past podcasts before. No one could go in there except the high priest once a year, and he had to be, I'm going to call it, prayed up to the point of, sabadabada. He had to be prayed up, and they would even tie a rope to his foot, and he had bells on the bottom of his robe. So if he was not properly right with God in the moment before he went in there, they could drag him out dead.
Drag his dead carcass out because he went into
That's
the presence of God, and he wasn't holy, he wasn't sanctified.
so.
That's
What
what
is
all
this?
that was about.
This temple being the curtain being torn is now we have access through Jesus and his sacrifice and him and our belief in him. That's what we have. That may be something for another podcast, and I know we've talked about that before in the Old Testament, but you're seeing these things that we've told you are coming come to fruition right now. This is it. This is where it's happening. It says that the Romans marveled. It says when the centurion, which would be the guy in charge, and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. And, there are people, and I haven't gone down this rabbit hole, but it would be an interesting one for a deep dive for anybody that wanted to do it, that there are now, with what we know in our geological reports and things that we can look at through archaeology and whatnot, that there was an early 1st century earthquake in the Dead Sea. And I think that would be so interesting to go and look at all that. Did somebody just say that she knew because she had old parents? She knew about this stuff? Okay.
That was
okay. I got you. Okay. Now, this is a point that gets made that many women were there. And I think Matthew, also Mark, Luke, and John all talk about this. This was significant for some reason. It says many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. And among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. But many women, so there was more than just them, but they named those specifically by name. And I just want to know why this is significant. I think number one, the men fled and the women stayed. Earlier Peter denied Jesus, the disciples scattered. Most of the 12 are absent from the crucifixion, yet the women remain. This is one of the most striking reversals in the Passion story, because society would have viewed women as having the least status. They become the most faithful witnesses. They witnessed the death. This is important. That they may have scattered the disciples that ran off. Maybe they were closer to the gunfight or whatever, but the women witnessed this. And it's historically important because they saw Jesus crucified. They saw Jesus die. They saw where he was buried. And later, they also become the witnesses of the empty tomb. Remember? The Gospels repeatedly connect these events through the same group of women. And it helps establish that there is no confusion about whether Jesus died, what tomb he was buried in, which is the one that they later found empty. If nobody saw what tomb he went in, how could they say, oh, it's empty? People could just say, well, that wasn't the tomb he was buried in.
Y'all couldn't find the one he was buried in. That's right.
Yeah. So Jesus, from the cross, provides for his mother. In John's account, it reveals that even while he was suffering on the cross, he's concerned about his mother. Most scholars, and I think, I can't see any proof of any different, that Joseph had already died, that she was a widow at this point. But Jesus, the eldest son, fulfills his responsibility by entrusting his mother to John's care. And you got to think about this, that fulfills the commandment to honor one's father and mother, doesn't it, Keith?
Oh, yeah.
Right there from the cross. Then I touched on before, women are going to become the first resurrection witnesses. These same women at the cross become the witnesses at the tomb. In ancient history, the ancient world, women's testimony carried less legal weight than men's. So what does that tell us? If someone were inventing the story, now I'm going to pause, inventing the story, they would not have written that women were the primary witnesses.
Yep.
But all 4 Gospels preserve this fact. And a lot of historians view this as evidence that the Gospel writers were reporting what actually happened, because they would have written this totally different if they wanted to make it sound good. That's what
same evidence you used last week to talk about
culturally advantageous story. In my calmer moment is what I call it.
Yeah.
If they want to make it sound good.
the disciples, if they were trying to concoct a story just to get everybody convinced that they weren't following a ruse or a con, they wouldn't have admitted all the stupid things they did and all the
They would have
confusion
said,
they had.
Raphael, a known scholar and fine man who'd never lied in his life, told everybody,
yeah,
not a bunch of women.
yeah.
Because, culturally, that was not considered necessarily, the soundest people to go by. I've put this up before, but the power of darkness, this is just a concentrated assault of evil against the Son of God. And I just think it's really important to stop and think that they thought that they were extinguishing the light of the world, that this was a big victory. But according to the New Testament and what happens, we know that the crucifixion becomes a means of redemption. Sin is atoned for, Satan is judged, death is conquered, resurrection follows. The power of darkness is real, but temporary. Darkness gets an hour, Christ gets the kingdom. The Via Dolorosa ended at a cross, but that wasn't the end of God's plan. Rome might have thought it was a victory, or at least a completion of got this over with. The religious leaders thought it was a triumph. Satan thought it was his greatest moment. But what is it? It is a doorway to redemption. And the world thought the story was over, but heaven's preparing an empty tomb, and that's just the beginning. Mm-hmm. That's just the beginning, Keith. So anyway, I think that's all I've got. I know there may be things you want to talk about. Have I gone over? I don't even know.
Well, we're just two minutes over. So
how about that?
You did great. Just a couple of things I want to throw in there. The place of the skull. I don't know how many of y'all remember, but when David, as a young man, slew Goliath and he cut his head off in the field and routed the Philistines, David cut Goliath's head off, number one, to make sure he was dead, but he took the skull to Jerusalem. Now, at the time, Jerusalem was not in control by King Saul. Jerusalem was not actually conquered until King David did. Now, so when there's a lot of Jewish writings that say when it referred to the place of the skull, that was the place that King David took Goliath's skull and put it on a pike, and remember, it was outside the walls of Jerusalem. It wasn't Jerusalem at the time. Do y'all remember? We've covered the geography and history of Jerusalem. Jerusalem at the time was a city of the Jebusites. And what had happened is King Saul defeated the Jebusites, all the little villages around, but he could not conquer Jebus. Before it was called Jebus, it was called Salem. Okay? And so Jerusalem was still a pagan city at the time. King David, well, he wasn't king at the time.
Yeah.
But young David took Goliath's head and put it on a pike and stuck it in the ground, overlooking the city of Jebus for all the Jebusites to see. Now, was that
the place of the skull? Is that what your point is?
That's what the Jewish writings say, is that was why it was called the place of the skull. And since that's a place that was recognized as later on when King David did take over Jerusalem and basically conquered the Jebusites once and for all, everybody remembered that as being the place of the skull. And it's called the place of the skull because that's where King David put Goliath's head on the pike and he dared anybody to come take it down. Remember, it was outside the city, so the Jebusites were already, pretty much walled in. They no longer controlled the area around Jerusalem, which, like I said, was called Jebus at the time. And so that's what the Jewish writings say was the place of the skull, and it was the place of Goliath's skull, Which,
Wow.
boy, how prophetic is that?
See,
How foretelling
I
is
ran
that?
into, and you and I have been talking about this a lot lately about how much misinformation there is out there. I ran into, I cannot tell you how many versions of which was the Way of Sorrows, which was the Via
Mhm.
Dolorosa. And I don't think we know. I
No,
don't think we know. I think we
no,
can know that no matter where it was not good. It was horrific and excruciating,
crowded.
torture,
Mhm.
mocking. All we know what went on. We may not know the exact steps of it. It doesn't change what happened in any way. And it doesn't change that two thieves or two robbers or two criminals or whatever they were, I would just say two sinners were crucified, one on each side of Jesus. And one was with him in paradise and one wasn't. And you
Yep.
just what you said, free will and choice and belief. And
Mhm.
that one was repentant and recognized, he said, we deserved this. He didn't deserve this. Remember
Right,
me when you come into your kingdom.
right.
That's the truth right there. That's the gospel right there. So
Well, before we break, anybody who wanted that reference, it's in hang on one second. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 54.
which reference are you talking about?
The one about David taking Goliath's skull and posting it on a hill outside the city of Jerusalem.
Outside the city. See, and it could be the same. I mean, that could be the same hill, but who's to say where that hill is? Because
Right.
unfortunately, every tourist trap there is, and I'm not saying everybody has bad intentions, but it's a big tourism is a big thing there. And depending on which ones you go to or who leads you around, this is where John the Baptist was baptizing people. This is where John the Baptist was baptized. This is where Jesus was buried. This is where
Yeah.
Jesus was buried. It's hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard. But archaeology is coming up with some pretty interesting things.
Well, the good thing about it, and we're gonna wrap this up. But the good thing about it is it's so much easier to find evidence than it was when I mean I can remember in high school trying to write a term paper. Oh, you had
Yeah.
to spend hours and hours in the index and um, learning the Dewey Decimal System and
Well, that's the
all
good
this.
and the bad, though, right? Because
Yeah,
there's so much information, but there's so much misinformation.
yeah. But here's the thing: with our ability to so quickly sift through all the information, you can uh, more quickly and more readily identify the information that lines up.
Yeah.
Uh, for example, and this is just an example, and I've mentioned this before, and we're going to have a. I'm going to show you the latest on the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, Sodom and Gomorrah, because of certain geological features, was always thought of as being at the southeastern end of the Dead Sea. Okay, but that doesn't match the biblical description.
Right.
And
You've
then
done
when
that one
they,
before a little bit, but we could do
oh
more on
my
that, sure.
gosh, the
Mhm.
geological evidence now, when the people really think it all lines up with the Bible. All
Mhm.
right. The other example, and this is one we really covered a lot, and that is where, in fact, did the Hebrews cross the Red Sea? Cross the Red Sea. And now,
I wish I could remember which one you did it in, but you did a great presentation on that way back in the very beginning. We
oh,
might have
yeah,
to get a clip of that.
yeah.
We need to do
Uh,
that. That'd be good.
oh, yeah. And the fact is, there's so much that actually lines up. And for any other, all the conventional wisdom places of crossing the Red Sea, they all lack something. They all contradict something in the Bible. Well, when you stick to what the Bible actually says about Mount Sinai and stuff like that, you figure out all the evidence points to here's where they crossed. It was the only place they could have crossed.
Yeah, it's really good. We'll have to do that sometime.
Yeah. So
All right. Well, I
anyway,
hope we gave them a good. I mean, you could spend a month talking about the details of the crucifixion.
Oh, one more thing before we go. Y'all realize that the Bible said there was 3 hours of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 hours of unusual cosmic phenomena is recorded all around the world at this
In
point
historical
in time.
records.
And it is not the result of a lunar eclipse.
Mm-hmm. Just like I was telling about that earthquake, that the recordings and stuff like that. That's another interesting thing to kind of do a deep dive on. It'd be very interesting.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to look into it.
Well, let's go, sweetie. We're 10 after.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, I hope we gave people a good idea of a pic. I'm trying to paint a picture of what that would have looked like. It's not a pretty picture. It's not a pretty picture.
Again, before we go, we're going to encourage you. If you've never seen it, do whatever you got to do to see Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
And if you have seen it and it's been a while, watch it again.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And thank you to those that watch this later. And we appreciate it. And
love y'all. Thank you for your support, your prayers, and your faithfulness